anybody who has a stirring in their heart, that there's something else that is deeper, I want to encourage them to follow that thought, to follow that inkling in their hearts, And I think that they will find that that inkling is trying to indicate to us that we are all in this together.
Thank you all for joining us. Welcome back to the Global Joy Summit. I'm Rodney McKenzie. I'm the Vice President of Allied Development at Fetzer Institute and a proud supporter of this Inspiring Joy Summit. And I'm delighted to be your host. In this session, I'm so excited to be speaking with Chude to explore his vision for how joy can be an agent of social, organizational, political, and economic transformation and success. Chude, I'm going to brag on you for a little bit, if you don't mind, just to tell
Okay.
folks a little bit about your brilliance and the joy they're going to experience just hearing about you. But Chude is the founder of Joy Inc. It's a revolutionary new business that really mainstreams the evidence and research on human flourishing, as well as deploys the evidence to help change the global conversation about about acceptable success metrics in policy, business, economics, education, social movements, and government. He has been a Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree, an Archbishop Desmond Tutu Fellow, and a World Fellow at Yale University. He is the host of #WithChude, and his writing and work have been featured in the New York Times, The Guardian, the BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, the Huffington Post, and the Financial Times. He is also the founder of Red and the author of 2 books. So thank you for being with us, Chude.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Jude, I have some questions for you, but first I just want to just thank you, and just as someone who has enjoyed your video blogs, your interviews, just your willingness and your ability to bring joy and to really speak at it so clearly and interview folks and really tease that up has been moving to me, and I know it's been moving to so many other people.
Thank you.
I'm so curious, like, where does this come from for you? I have a lot of questions, but I just want to know, where does this joy come from?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, it's, this joy, the one that I live every day now, strangely enough, came from the depths of what I call a Great Depression.
Mm,
In 20, I've shared this story in my own communities here. In 2016, in 2015, I had my first taste of depression. I had my first taste of in 2016, I had a first full-blown clinical depression diagnosis. What was interesting is there's a professor in Colombia, I forget her name now, I don't know how I forget it, who said that depression is can be a knock on the door to a deeper
mm,
spiritual experience. And that was so true for me. It's a cliche now, but it was so true. There were aspects of reality and myself that I didn't even know existed. I
mm,
think the New York Times, David Brooks, calls it the two mountains. And so sometimes in your life, you climb one mountain and it's the mountain of accomplishment, and you kind of discover your intellectual capabilities. And then something happens in your life, that questions everything you thought about happiness, joy, peace, all of that. And
mm,
that is now the second mountain. There you confront yourself, you meet yourself. And so 2016, and I mean, that's also a lifelong process, I think. But that becomes some kind of highlight because I meet myself every other day now. But 2016 forced me to confront the limits of accomplishments, of reason, of intellect as a base for joy, you know, helped me. I realized the illusions. An Indian spiritual teacher, Sadhguru, said that disillusionment is a good thing because it
mm,
means that you are losing your illusions.
mm. Yes, yes.
And so 2016 was that. And so I began to form the new foundations for a more true a more wholesome joy.
I love that. I think about the Taoist text talks about that the reason that we know happiness is because we have seen
No.
deep sorrow, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's like that understanding both helps
Yeah.
you understand something beautiful about yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I
Absolutely.
love it. And then how would you? I mean, because of that experience, how do you define joy, or how do you think about what joy is for you?
That's fascinating. I used to have a quick answer, at my fingertips, and now I forget it, which is a good thing because then that means the answer is more authentic, I think.
Yes.
um, I think joy is an alive state of being at peace with the world. You know, and I take that as, I don't know who said that, but somebody said joy is peace that is awake, that is alive. And so for me, that is joy. Joy is when I feel at one with the world, when I
Mm.
feel like I belong in the world, like I'm coherent, I'm integrated with the world, wherever I am at that point in time. Those are the spaces where I think joy lives.
Wow, I don't know why today I as you said that I thought of my grandmother who
Right.
we grew up in a poor South Dallas community, and
Right.
she always talked about joy, and that it was after going to church she would say joy was like it shot up in my bones. It was like
Mm,
this
mm.
joy that she felt, and it had nothing to do with what she had or didn't have,
No,
but I
absolutely.
think it was rooted in this connection, community, and
Yeah,
loving her children and loving her community in a very wonderful way.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I know that you have this very big vision for the world and a
Hmm.
very big vision of how our inner subject experience of well-being and joy can have a powerful impact
Yeah.
on not only in our personal lives and families, but also our organizations and companies and governments and politics and
Yeah.
culture. And that joy literally can be a force that can transform the world from the inside out. And I'm
Yes.
really excited to get to that, but I think it may be helpful to have a little context too. You've
Okay.
said a couple of things that I want to quote because I think they're really powerful.
Okay.
One is that the world has come to a place where everything we assumed has
Yeah.
been turned up on its head. And then also that we're at the cusp of fundamentally rethinking our assumptions about human behavior and rethinking the metrics for measuring human success and flourishing. And
Yeah.
these are historic times that we live in. Can you talk about that a little bit for us? And like, what are some of the assumptions that you feel like we're at the cusp of rethinking, and how have those failed us? And what are some results that you think that has created?
Well, I think the easiest one is, well, the easiest one would be just looking at the numbers, the data on life satisfaction and happiness, across the world, especially in the West, where living conditions are at their best in historic terms, in terms of access to food and water and security and infrastructure and technology and all of that. You would think that people who live in the West, who have access to what we would call as a high, I mean, if our grandparents, if our forebears 100 years ago woke up now, they'd be amazed at how far we've come in terms of technology and wealth. Still, we're not as happy. We were sold a, a was sold an innocent delusion, that when our lives became better in materialist terms, that we would feel better about our lives, and the entire focus on the Gini coefficient, on GDP, on GNI, all these metrics where if we make people's lives materially better, if people had more wealth, if people had access to more shiny things, then they would be happier with their lives. But the data on happiness, the data on life satisfaction across the past 10 to 20 years just shows us that that's not the case. I like to I like to differentiate between mental health conditions and emotional health conditions. And somewhere in that middle lies things like depression and anxiety, which are the two easiest data sets we can hold on to. And those numbers are galloping in America, they are galloping in the UK, they are galloping in many parts of Southeast Asia, they are galloping in some parts of Europe, and so that's the first thing that signifies to us that something is amiss. And so people begin to question it. Are we spending too much time at work? Are we spending too much time with social media? Are we spending too much, what are the power dynamics? What's happening with income inequality? We are stumbling in the dark trying to figure out how we got here. But the data has shown us that something is wrong. People live with this. Thinkers across time have talked about this, but it's more pronounced now. This sense of unease with the world, this sense of discomfort with the world. We've always had, we've always, we've always had a bit of inequality in the world, not as pronounced as these days, but we've always had that. But we've always managed to have some equanimity, Richard Lyons, who is an economist, I'm sure. He's spoken across the world. Wrote this book about the economics of happiness, and he said one of the things that economists realize is that he was talking about envy and how people were less unhappy in years past because they only compared their lives with people they saw on television about 6 hours a day. Now they compare their lives with the 5,000 people whose lives they encounter on social media every day. So, I think that's what it is. And so the reasons why we're questioning democracy, we're questioning capitalism, much as I adore these two systems, the reason why we're questioning the workplace, and the values we bring to the workplace and having work as a source of meaning in our lives is because all the promises that it appeared that the Enlightenment and industrialization promised us didn't come to pass. And so we're looking for better answers.
That is so beautiful.
Thank you.
I think I'm like screaming here because I think you're really touching on, as I think about my friends and the people who I know who have been told that if you make a certain kind of money, if you have a certain kind of job, that you'll be happy, that you'll
Yes.
experience joy, and now they're waking up in these beautiful homes with beautiful things and realizing they're deeply unhappy. They're
Yes.
deeply wanting something more.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
I'm curious, like with your vision and what you're saying, where do we go from here? Like, what do we do?
Mm.
How do we begin to shift this experience that so many folks are having?
I think that I'm sure you're familiar with that. I hope the people who are watching are familiar with the Harvard Grant study on what makes people happier. I think it's a 20-year longitudinal survey or something. Essentially, it came back to a very simple thing that I'm sure your grandmother would have told them, without them asking. What makes people happier are warm relationships. We live in a world that wants everything to be quantified and measured in very concrete terms. And so that message isn't gaining currency in the world. But everything I've read and everything I've seen and everything I've heard brings me to that point. The more that the world moves away from the sanctity and safety of warm personal relationships, the more we're going to lack meaning in our lives. You're in America. God help you. And
Yes, yes.
it's one of I love America. I think that America is a beacon, for many of the world's most important conversations and battles. It's like this It's like this large screen TV where we project all our anxieties, and we see people kind of wrestle with them. So America is important to the world in that respect. But the political tribalism that is in America, for instance, I often say comes from the fact that, we used to have, as faulty as they were, conclaves for spirituality, conclaves for an inner intimacy through relationship, and not just church, not just temples, not just, mosque, but just those community centers. And that's missing. So people are going elsewhere, because it's instinctive. Something is missing. You don't know what it is. You begin to turn to, conspiracy groups on the internet, and tribes on Twitter. And I understand the hunger for that, because I also hungered and hunger for the same thing. We are wired to hunger for that. But I think that until the message goes, and this is where, the Joy Summit is so important. This is where, the work that even you do at the Federal Institute and all these organizations do is so important, because until that message of warm relationships catches fire in the world, we will think that the problem is social media. We will think that the problem is political tribalism. We will think that the problem is income inequality, even though that is a problem that we do need to solve. But that is not the real thing. I used to say to people that people will say, when people see the data on happiness and see that many people in poor countries are happier than many people in rich countries, two things happen. One, they disbelieve the data. And two, they feel like they must make a political argument against the data, as if it meant that people should be poor. But that's not what it means. Yeah. It simply says people should have a good standard of living, but that's not what makes them necessarily joyful.
That's right.
And I always say to people that nobody doubts that people who are lower income or live in poorer communities, no one doubts that they can have trust in their lives. No one doubts that they can have love in their lives. No one doubts that they can, but we doubt that they can have happiness in their life. But this is the same range of emotion, And so what is the thing there that people can have billions and millions and thousands and still not have? It's warm relationships. It really is, and I wish there was a highfalutin, word I could use that's as important, that's as big as gross domestic product, to kind of convince people, because our minds are wired to think of the world in social, in political and economic terms. So if arguments are not framed in that way, they don't gain a currency in our minds. But we need to tell ourselves the truth. We are happier because we have lost the warmth of relationship. We've lost it,
Yeah.
And that's where it is. That's absolutely where it is.
Wow, what a powerful awareness. I feel like I want to pause for just to think about, like, what would it mean to have a currency of warm relationships? Like, what would it mean to the way I think about it is, I flew in today to see my mother, who's not feeling well, and walking into the room and seeing my mother and her smile gave me a sense of love and joy and happiness that trumps everything. I just it trumped all of that, and that is such a powerful awareness.
Yeah.
It's such a it's an inner experience.
Yes.
Too.
Yes. This, what you said, is so powerful. Many years ago, when I came out of the depression, part of the research I love my mom greatly. I'm close to my mom, but I began to make it a point of duty, because we live in the same city, to see her once a week. And I can't tell you how huge. I mean, something happened, in 2017. I was at a fellowship at Yale, and one day I woke up. I was ill. I think I was having a fever. And I had my best friend from Cameroon, a dear friend who was in the same program from Cameroon, and she was just 3 rooms away. And I called her and said to her, "Can I come and spend some time with you? And let's, and she said, oh yes, come. I was just going to prayer, so you can join me in a moment of prayer. And we didn't end up praying, but I just went into a room and it was physically warm, and we just had conversation. And in 2 hours, I told her, oh my God, I forgot that I was ill when I got here. And that doesn't happen all the time. It's not a scientific certainty. But, this, I'm going to say something that's a bit controversial. Yeah. We live in a world where emotional boundaries are primal, yeah, are taking primacy, and they are important. But you see, a dear friend of mine moved to America from Nigeria 2 years ago for work, and she said to me that the one thing she didn't know she needed was her mother's intrusiveness.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And she said that what she realized was that, yes, her mother needed boundaries, but she needed to have negotiated the space of warmth and boundaries rather than pushing her mother away because her mother is intrusive. She needed to have an intimate conversation with her mother about how to balance, intrusiveness and boundaries. What has happened in the world is that we have unfortunately moved from one extreme to the next. We've moved from that warmth, because people have abused the spaces, so people have become worried. So in trying to safeguard ourselves, we've moved from one extreme to the next. As a whole, we need to come to the beautiful middle where we understand that we can't run away from ourselves and each other. And that's what you notice from your grandma. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. The notion that we can't run away from ourselves, right?
Yeah.
That you can change. I always think of it as you can change the details, you can change like the chess pieces, but you still have to deal with you. You know
Yes.
who you
Yes.
are, where
Yes.
you are.
Yes.
That's powerful.
Yes.
And Judy, I wonder, is that what you mean by? I was really moved by this notion of the politics and culture of meaning centered on evidence across the fields of sociology, divinity, psychology, politics, and economics. Is this what you're pointing us to? This politics of culture of meaning about the way we know ourselves, the way we're in relationship. Is that what that's about?
Absolutely. I mean, the politics of meaning, I think, was there's a rabbi, Michael Lerner, who wrote about this in, I think, the 90s. And I came across this concept from Hillary Clinton. She, met this rabbi, I think, in the 90s when she was in the White House. And, she began to talk about this politics. One of the fascinating things was that when Hillary Clinton began her 2016 campaign, one of the taglines that she first tested, because I follow politics globally, well, at least in America, was love and kindness.
That's
And
so
I
interesting.
knew she was going to abandon it because the culture is hostile to things that we can't measure. Love and kindness is mushy. How do you measure love and kindness? How do you
Yeah.
talk about love and kindness in political terms? But in doing that, she was hearkening to into her 1990s popularization of the politics of meaning by Michael Lerner, and she was pilloried and mocked by the mainstream American press. In fact, one magazine profile called her Saint Hillary and said she was going. But that's what the culture does to people who try to bring this language into the body politic. And but that's the problem. The problem, one of my favorite writers, Chimamanda Adichie, gave a speech at the BBC 2 days ago, and she said, "You can't legislate affection."
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can't turn to politics. I mean, you can't. So it's the idea that, and also it's taken from that is the idea that we've created political systems and contexts that are divorced from the things that really matter to us as humans. And I think one of the reasons why America welcomed like a man in the desert, the initial candidacy of Barack Obama, was because he seemed to have brought that idea that politics should have meaning back
Yeah.
into the conversation. And every time we have leaders like that, something in us leaps for joy. And so the way I've thought of it is we need to have a culture that encourages people who have um, who have encountered, who have thought about politics beyond just economics and identity, who have thought about it a bit more thoughtfully, who have come to a deeper level of consciousness. We need to create a system where more of them come into politics. We need to have a system where they come into politics. They take the other imperatives seriously, but it comes from a deepening, a deep sense of consciousness. We've had political leaders like that throughout time. Incidentally, in Nigeria we've had them. Mandela was like that. He understood fundamentally that the fundamental driver for changing people's lives had to be a real compassion for them, a real love for them. We have had too few leaders like that, but we've had them, and we need them. And that's what Michael Lena was talking about. We need leaders who have come into a full consciousness of themselves, a full understanding that politics must do more than just provide the basics. Now, we need them to be involved in mainstream politics so that the language of legislation, the language of politics, the language of economics can fundamentally change. MLK, funny enough, wrote a series of books that explored these in detail. Many of his books were just about how can love become our founding ethic, And of course, we dismissed that part and took the other part that was more hardcore, without forgetting that for him, both were inextricable. He always talked about the beloved community, the beloved community, the beloved community. And that's what I mean by the politics of meaning. How can this beloved community become the animating force for people who are formulating policy and for people who are going into politics? Broadly, that's what I mean. That's why I'm fascinated by the concept.
Oh, not to sound cheesy, but I love that. I love what you said today. And I work for the Federal Institute. We really believe in that too. And I think I spend a lot of my time working with other philanthropists, reminding us that philanthropy is rooted in a love of humankind. That's what it actually means. And so, how
Yes.
do we as lovers love each other? How do we demonstrate love with resources, with our time, with our energy? And that can be a revolutionary, transformative act.
Yeah.
I think if
Yeah.
we do that differently.
Absolutely. I do agree with you. And I have no doubt in my mind. Part of the reason why I wanted to do this and why I was excited to talk to you is because, when I got your profile, I began to read up on the FedSci Institute. I thought, we need more people who are just pushing this message back into the world using the language of the times. But I have no doubt in my mind that this is where we need to return to. This is where we need to be. Those are the conversations we need to have. Those are the context we need to push. I understand through time why it has been difficult, again, because it's difficult to measure.
Yeah.
Why this message hasn't gone mainstream, but it doesn't make it any less important or any less urgent that people hear this message.
Well, I want to speak to. I'm sure there's a group of folks who are listening to us right now who are like, I need evidence. I need like scientific proof, like evidence that
Yeah.
this is actually powerful and this is transformative. I
Yeah.
wonder if you could share even some of your favorite research highlights on like human flourishing and the power of emotion that are foundational to your work.
I always say to people that we should look at the Nordic countries. And the Nordic countries have topped, the indexes for happiness consistently over the past, I think, 5 to 10 years. Yeah. And to look at, my best evidence of this is incidentally the happiness indexes, And when you look at the happiness indexes and look at the top countries from there, look at the countries, you find a number of things. These are countries where people mostly agree on the basics, be it reproductive health, be it identity. There's less tribalism. One, these are societies where the government understand the necessity of taking care of the basics for the people who live. They're not scrounging for healthcare. They have a
Mm,
sense that like the people around them care about them, that businesses care about them, that government cares about them, that the clinics care about them, that the wealthy care about them. So there is a sense of social cohesion. That's what I'm driving at in this
yeah.
country, And that's the primary thing. It's not just that they are wealthy, it's not just that they can take care of their economies, it's that then they invest those resources into social cohesion policies, so to
Mm,
speak, things that make people feel a sense of belonging. And again, things that reduce, so to speak, tribalism. Because when I mention tribalism has become something that isolates, And there is always the more, I mean, this data doesn't exist in the entire world, but the more, at least when we look at America and the UK, the more, if you got to find, the more the articles about political tribalism have increased in the last 5 years, the lower the two countries that have most been measured, the UK and the US,
mm.
fall in happiness indexes.
That's so interesting.
It's so interesting. And so that for me is one crucial measure, of these whole things that we're talking about. I don't think that it needs to get more complex than that. I know that in America, for instance, they have been, I don't have access to those data now, but I know in America, certain states, I think California and others, had gotten some of the researchers from Jeffrey Sachs' movement for happiness and the economy, to help design particular engagements in particular communities. I will send you one of that when I remember it. And they saw an uptick in people's feelings of belonging and ultimately life satisfaction and ultimately happiness, just go up and up and up. And so,
Mm,
for me, those two examples, some states in America, I think California was one of them, and the evidence from the Nordic countries and some countries in Southeast Asia, I think South Korea is one of them, show the problem is that there are too few of these examples in the world.
mm,
And so that makes us ignore them. But the challenge is to increase. America is a very interesting country. A few years ago, two political candidates were having a debate about healthcare, and somebody said, I forgot what country. Look at Denmark, as an example of a society that takes care of itself. And another candidate said, "Well, apologies, madam, but we are not Denmark." And I said, "Well, you should be." You should be. It has been the happiest country in
yeah.
the world for, much of the past 10 years. People
Mm,
in those countries, no matter. So these are countries where income inequality, by which I mean of course, that we know the gap between the rich and the poor, isn't necessarily lower than many other developed nations. But people still feel happier because they are taken care of, because
yeah.
they feel like they belong. And so the fact that there are too few countries, and many of these are smaller countries, often makes us disregard the poignant lessons from their data that we should apply in all our other nations.
I love, yeah, I think that's really powerful. And I think what I also appreciate about that is, remembering that we are not alone,
Yes,
remembering that there are other ways of doing and being in the world can
yes,
expand your imagination on
yes,
what is possible and doable in your life. And so,
yes,
like the example that you offered is what happens when you realize what maybe there's a whole nother way that we could do healthcare that is actually based in love, or what
yes,
maybe I don't have to work 100 hours a week
yes,
to be happy, or like, I mean, there's ways of just observing others that allows you to realize and have an aha moment, or have
yes.
a radical realization that your life can be, and a country's life can be
Yeah.
completely different.
Absolutely, absolutely. Absolutely, that's it. That's it. And so, whatever the language we find that we translate in a specific context into policy prescriptions and political positions, that will differ. But the greatest, the center of these is love.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's I'm taking a moment. I'm sure folks who are listening are taking a moment even for that idea.
Yeah.
Um, that's really powerful. You know, one of the things that Joy Inc. has is that there's these 5 assignments or 5 domains, and that's like people, organizations, schools, social movements, and nations in which it is supporting this kind of transformation. I'm curious, like, what do you think your vision would be for those 5 areas,
Mm.
or how are you affecting change in those areas, and how do you see them interconnected?
Right. So those 5 areas for us. So I'll explain. Let me go from the end of the question.
Yeah.
They need to connect because those are in our thinking based on the research, and we share some of our research foundations on the website. These are the 5 spaces that most determine, national life, the body politic, as it were, schools, the workplace, these are the places where we spend, the schools and the workplace are the place where we spend the bulk of our lives, in modern times.
Mm,
If we're children, if we're adults, whether in school or in the workplace. And so any engagements that ignore these 2 spaces fail, you know.
mm,
Thinkers at Yale, I think Martin Seligman has this framework called PERMA, PERMA, and the researchers at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence have a framework called RULER, RULER, and both of those things were to be infused in the curriculum for people to be able to access the tools they need to flourish in their lives and to handle adversity. They've not been able to move as far as I would hope, but they are they're fighting the good fight. And so part of our vision was um, um, how can we facilitate the inclusion of some of the principles that drive these frameworks into schools and workplaces across sub-Saharan Africa, which our focus is. But while that's our big audacious goal, we want to start with one story at a time. Yeah. So to get to that big place, we decided to start small. And that's why our primary focus has been on our media products, principally the show with Chude. Yeah. I'm
mhm,
inspired. I'm inspired. I mean, like most people across the world, I'm personally inspired by Oprah.
mm,
Oprah inspired an entire nation and the world to be vulnerable, to be,
yeah.
to be confessional before we even knew, before the scientists began to investigate and research, what it meant for people to speak to one another. There have been interventions that have all been centered on just talking to one another. Uh, Oprah brought the idea of being vulnerable before we even knew that the word vulnerability mattered into homes across the world. And so what we decided to do is we asked ourselves, where is the one place that we can most most what's the one place that's most powerful to spread this message across sub-Saharan Africa, which is where we are focused. And so the show with Chude is where we do that. We have intimate conversations about politics, about education, about all these themes that I have explored. So when I talk to politicians, the conversation is different. We're talking about this conversation about love, and I'm talking to playwrights, and I'm talking to business leaders. I mean, I always tell people that our show is one of the first, I mean, some of the most powerful people in Nigerian society, West African society, are bank MDs. These are the ultimate of our capitalist system. And for the first time, we had this year one of Nigeria's top bank MDs come to talk about, loss and shame and fear and vulnerability. And I was talking to him about Nigeria went through a recapitalization of our banking system a decade or so ago. And I said to him, everybody has talked about the economic mechanics of this, but I want to talk to you about the emotions of it. I want to talk to you about, how that affects the people that are around you and the people how does that affect us personally? And so those are the conversations we have wherever I go. and bringing spaces of intimacy. And we don't have that on in my side of the continent. We don't. We have a lot of social taboos. We have a lot of shame, a lot of fear of vulnerability. We're not culturally wired to share our deepest emotions. You will see in the public space across America, you will hear many people who were born in Africa say, I knew my parents cared about me, but I never heard my father say, I love you. I never heard my
Yeah.
father say to my mother, I love you. And without this is not a matter of culture that one culture is superior to the other. It just means that sometimes some truths come one way first before going the other way, And so what we are focused on now is how can we have the with Chude conversations, bring that intimacy into people's big and small screens across the continent with as many influencers as we possibly can, from business to markets to schools to individuals. That's just what our mission has been. And then when people invite us, and then often based on that, people invite us into their schools, people invite us into their companies, people invite us into government spaces to come and advise them or come and facilitate these conversations. And that's how we're spreading our message to the world.
Mm, that's beautiful. It's like a beautiful wildfire of
Yes,
joy and love that you're
yes,
igniting in a very
yes,
powerful way.
yes, yes,
Um,
yes,
I wonder, I feel like we've covered a lot, and I know that we're almost at the end of our time. I wonder, like, what you would leave, for, let's say that someone right now who's listening, who is moved by your message and really is thinking about their relationships and meaning and wanting to really center themselves in that kind of love and joy that you're talking about. What would you leave them with? What would you want them to know?
yeah. I'm trying to think of that one. Um, you know, and I try to use American examples just because I know it's a global audience, and so they are more likely to relate to examples that they are familiar with rather than examples only from here. Um, Two things. Archbishop Desmond Tutu. One of the books that transformed the way I saw joy was the Book of Joy. Yeah, by
Mm,
Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. And I'm so deeply thankful to both of them. Desmond Tutu dancing in heaven, as I'm sure he is. And the Dalai Lama is still with us. And one of the things he said, I wanted to use something but I remember that Desmond Tutu has said that Ubuntu was the message he kept spreading across the world, and it's I am because we are. You know, the popularization of Buddhism across the world, of Tibetan Buddhism at least, has led us to an appreciation of the idea that we are not separate from all that there is. We aren't separate from all that there is. And it's not even a revolutionary thought. The deepest spiritual thinkers, the deepest philosophical thinkers talk about the web of humanity, the fabric that ties us together. And every time that I have drifted into unhappiness and discontent, I have noticed myself thinking of myself as separate from all of us, you know.
mm,
And, um, Maya Angelou, um, there's a powerful quote I'm trying to remember that she gave about, I am human. Nothing human is alien to.
mm,
And all of these people are trying to indicate to us that we are all in this together. One of the poems that I took, one of the quotes I took from a poem when I was going through depression was, I am here. I forget how it says. I deserve to be here, much like the trees and the stars. You know,
mm.
what I want to leave us with. The world is noisy, and there are a lot of ideologies clashing against each other in the world. But for anybody who has a stirring in their heart that there's something else that is deeper, that's more meaningful, I want to encourage them to follow that thought, to follow that inkling in their hearts, And I think that they will find that that inkling is trying to indicate to us that we are all in this together. And the closer, whatever it is with you, if it's prayer, if it's giving, if it's self-sacrifice, if it's loving a sick relative, if it's visiting loved ones, whatever it is that keeps us closer to the truth that we're all in this together. Whatever it is that can lead us there will lead us home, and home is joy, and home is happiness, and home is contentment, and home is peace. So that's what I want to lead people. I cannot prescribe how people get there. But that place that I think we are longing for is a place where we remember deeply, intimately, that we all are in this together. And that's what I want to live with us. That's where it is. That's where it is. Just and you know what? I mean, I forget this lesson sometimes because you're in the world, you're trying to catch a flight, you're trying to seal a deal, you're trying to get a grant, you're trying to, communicate to a lover about something that they did that hurt you. Then I forget. I'm human, so I forget. But when I remember, the truth, we're not separate from all that it is, and we're all in this together, I come back home.
Wow. Well, thank you for reminding us all to come back home,
Yeah.
and thank you for reminding us that there's a love at the center of our hearts, that happiness can be right where we are, that is a powerful way of being, and that can shift and transform not only our economies, it can transform our politics, our world. And I'm so grateful for you, Chude.
Thank you.
So
Thank
thank
you.
you.
I'm grateful for your questions. I'm grateful for the space you've created. Grateful for your work. I thank you for it.
And so with that, we will say goodbye. Thank you all.
Thank you.